The Kyron Horman case begins in the soft morning light of Skyline Elementary School, with damp Oregon air on the pavement and the quiet shuffle of families moving through a science fair. Settle in, and let the pace be slow, because this file has never moved quickly. Tonight, we sit beside it carefully, as if the pages are thin from being turned too many times. You can imagine the school first, not as a symbol, but as a real place. A low building on Northwest Skyline Boulevard, tucked among trees, with wet leaves near the curb and the smell of paper displays inside the hallways. On the 4th of June 2010, Kyron Horman was 7 years old, wearing glasses and a black shirt with green letters across the front. The Kyron Horman case would become one of Oregon's most searched, most discussed missing child investigations, but that morning still began with small, ordinary sounds. There were footsteps in the hallway, voices softened by classroom walls, and the faint squeak of shoes on polished floors. Sure, the science fair tables, the trifold boards, the careful handwriting, and the patient pride of children standing near their projects. Kyron had made a display about the red-eyed tree frog. In one photograph from that morning, he stands beside it, small and serious, with his shoulders slightly rounded in the way children sometimes hold themselves when they know a picture is being taken. That photograph became one of the anchors of the file. You return to it often, because it holds time still. The image does not explain anything, and perhaps that is why detectives kept coming back to the same narrow window. Kyron was there in the morning. He was seen at school. Then, by the afternoon, he was not on the bus home. At first, the gap may have seemed like a school day confusion, the kind that can be solved with one call, one checked office log, one teacher remembering a change in plans. You sit with that early uncertainty for a moment, because every cold case has a first hour when no one yet knows how large it will become. At around 3:30 in the afternoon, Kyron did not come home as expected. Soon after, a call went to the school, and then to emergency dispatch, and the gentle, ordinary morning began to take on the shape of a long investigation. The first difficulty in the Kyron Horman case was not only that he was missing, it was that the day itself had been open and busy. Parents and children had moved in and out, hallways had not been sealed. The school was full of familiar faces, but also full of motion, and motion is hard to reconstruct later. You turn the first page slowly, and the paper makes a dry sound under your hand. Investigators had to begin with a place that was both contained and porous. Skyline Elementary was not a locked evidence room. It was a living school, breathing with morning routines, backpacks, coffee cups, classroom chatter, and the mild disorder of a special event. When detectives asked who saw Kyron, and when, they were asking memories to become exact. Memory does not always do that kindly. A witness may remember a shirt, but not the minute. Another may remember seeing a child near a hallway, but not whether the bell had rung. Someone may be sure at first, then less sure later, because the mind keeps touching a memory until the edges soften. As you sit with the file, you can feel how much of the first investigation depended on ordinary people trying to be precise about an ordinary morning. Kyron's stepmother, Terry Horman, said she last saw him walking toward his classroom at around 8:45 in the morning. That time would become one of the quiet posts in the timeline. It is not loud, it is just a line on a page. But once detectives placed it there, everything around it had to be measured. You can hear the low murmur of an interview room, the click of a recorder, and the scratch of a pen moving across a notebook. Detectives would ask the same questions in different ways, not always because they expected a new answer, but because repetition can reveal the shape of a day. What happened before school? Where the truck was parked? Who was in the building? Which hallway Kyron walked down? What errands followed? Which clocks were noticed, and which were only guessed at later? In patient detective work, time is rarely a clean line. It is more like a drawer full of receipts, phone records, sightings, school attendance notes, and small domestic details. You sort through it piece by piece. A grocery store visit, a gym check-in, a photograph posted online, a child marked absent, a bus arrival that never brought him home. The second difficulty was that the missing window was discovered late, not through neglect, but through the ordinary rhythm of a school day that did not know it was carrying a mystery. Kyron was not reported missing in the first minutes after the science fair. He was not known to be absent from home until the afternoon bus route ended. By then, the morning had already scattered. Think of the air inside the school after dismissal. Warm from bodies and cleaning products, with classroom doors half open and papers still pinned to walls. By late afternoon, students had gone home, cars had left, and small traces had been stepped over many times. If there had been a simple physical clue, it had to survive hours of normal life. That is a difficult thing for any investigation to ask. When the first officers and deputies arrived, they began checking the school, the home, and the surrounding area. Search and rescue teams were activated that evening. The woods around Skyline are not empty, flat spaces. They are green, uneven, and damp, with underbrush, drainage cuts, roadside shoulders, and places where sound seems to fold into the trees. You can feel the coolness there, the kind that settles into sleeves as daylight thins. The search became large very quickly. Local agencies, state partners, federal investigators, the FBI, and many trained searchers joined the effort. Dogs worked through scent and ground. Volunteers moved through brush. Roads were checked. Fields and wooded areas were considered again and again. Yet a large search does not always mean a clear direction. You can imagine a map spread across a table, its corners curling slightly under the weight of coffee mugs and radios. Pins and circles may help people think, but they cannot make certainty appear. Detectives had a school, a last known morning, a family timeline, and a boy who seemed to have disappeared from a place filled with people. Each fact was firm enough to hold, but not firm enough to carry the case all the way across. But there was another, quiet problem, waiting inside the same morning. And it lived in the difference between being seen and being accounted for. A person can be visible in a hallway and still become difficult to place later, because visibility is not the same as supervision. You sit with that distinction for a while, and it feels almost too small to matter until the whole case begins leaning on it. At a science fair, people glance, greet, bend down to admire poster boards, and then move on. They see without recording, and later, when detectives ask them to remember, the morning has already begun to blur. The Kyron Horman case depended heavily on that blur, because investigators needed a clean picture from a crowded place. You can imagine the detectives reviewing every account with a quiet kind of discipline, not judging the witnesses for forgetting, but trying to understand what each person truly knew. The smell of copier toner would cling to the duplicated statements. The edges of the pages would warm under desk lamps. Someone would underline a time, then circle a room number, then pause, because the next line did not quite meet the one before it. Schools create their own memory problems. You may remember the bell, but not the hand on the clock. You may remember a child's project, but not which adult was nearby. You may remember a face because the face became famous later, and that can make the memory feel firmer than it was on the morning itself. Detectives know this, and so they learn to be careful with confidence. In the early days, investigators had to sort sighting from certainty. That is patient work, and it can be humbling. You take one statement, then another, then a third, and you ask whether they support each other or only sound similar because everyone is trying to help. The room may be quiet, except for a chair creaking, a phone vibrating softly, and the low hum of fluorescent lights above the table. There were reports and recollections around the science fair, but no single public account has ever closed the gap. Kyron had been photographed there. He had been at the school. He was expected in class. Yet the exact movement between his display and whatever happened next has remained unclear in the public record, and that is where the file becomes heavy in your hands. You can feel the weight of that uncertainty, not as drama, but as practical difficulty. If a child leaves a place by a known door with a known person at a known time, detectives have a path to follow. If the door is uncertain, the person is uncertain, and the time is a range, every road outward becomes possible for too long. The case widens before it deepens. That is one reason the Kyron Horman investigation became so large. It had to hold too many possibilities at once. You can picture the command center atmosphere, papers taped to walls, radio traffic coming in softly, maps marked and remarked until the ink begins to feather. The smell of coffee would sit in the room for hours. Rain jackets would dry over chair backs. Search coordinators would compare grids while phones kept ringing. The geography around Skyline mattered deeply. It was not a downtown corner with cameras on every storefront and witnesses passing every few seconds. It was a school near wooded roads, driveways, rural edges, and stretches where a vehicle could be ordinary and still not be noticed carefully. You can look at that terrain on a map and understand, without any fear, why searchers had to move slowly. They searched the school, then the surrounding area, then broader areas as tips came in. Search teams know the patience of this kind of work in their bodies. Boots grow damp, knees brush ferns, gloves catch on blackberry canes. A dog turns its head toward a scent that may be something or may be nothing, and everyone waits for the handler's face. But searching is not only movement, it is also record-keeping. You turn the page and find grids, times, team names, weather notes, places cleared and places to revisit. The quiet truth is that a search can be thorough and still not answer the question placed before it. Land can keep its silence even when good people walk it carefully. In the Kyron Horman case, the search did not produce the kind of discovery that tells detectives what happened. That absence shaped everything after it. Without a found route, without a clear scene away from the school, without a physical endpoint that could be studied, the investigation had to lean harder on timelines, statements, digital records, and the slow testing of human accounts. Each of those tools can help, but each has limits. So we move next from the hallway to the clock, because in a case like Kyron Horman's, time becomes one of the main pieces of evidence. You place the school morning on one side of the desk and the afternoon call on the other, and between them sits the part no one has been able to fill. It is a plain kind of emptiness, and plain things can be the hardest to solve. The morning began with a science fair visit, and then, according to the public timeline, Kyron was not seen in class as expected. His absence did not become an emergency until later that day. You can imagine the attendance process, papers moving from classroom to office, assumptions passing quietly from one adult to another. A school has routines, and routines are meant to make days manageable. Sometimes they also create spaces where one small misunderstanding can last too long. It matters that Kyron's family expected him to come home on the bus. It matters that he did not. You sit with the bus stop for a moment because it is one of the simplest images in the whole case. A road, a waiting adult. The sound of the bus approaching, brakes breathing, doors folding open. Then the absence where a child should have been. That moment turned the day around. The question was no longer whether a child was in the wrong classroom or had gone to an office. The question became where Kyron had been since the morning and who had last known his movements. You can hear how quickly ordinary voices would change, still controlled, but tighter at the edges. Calls would be made. Names would be repeated. The school would be asked to check again. Investigators often say the first hours matter, but in this case, those hours had already passed inside an ordinary school day. That did not make the investigation careless. It made it harder from the beginning. You can almost feel the delay as a physical thing, like a cool draft under a closed door. It is not loud, but it changes the room. Detectives then had to reconstruct the gap backward. They could not simply follow Kyron forward from the moment he was noticed missing. They had to return to the morning and ask what had been missed before anyone knew to look. That is a difficult mental motion. You take a day that felt normal to those living it, and you ask it to become evidence. This is where patient detective work becomes less like pursuit and more like accounting. Every minute must be placed somewhere. Every errand must be checked against something outside memory. Receipts, phone records, security images, witness statements, and vehicle movements all become small stones in a path. Some stones hold, some shift when weight is placed on them. Terry Horman's timeline received intense scrutiny because she was the adult publicly associated with Kyron's last confirmed morning at school. In a calm review of the file, you can hold that fact without turning it into certainty. Investigators looked at her statements, her errands, her reported movements, and the timing of where she said she had been. That is what detectives do when the last known contact is close. The public attention around her grew, sometimes far beyond what was known. You can feel how a case changes when the outside world begins pressing against it. News cameras arrive, microphones appear near driveways, online forums collect fragments and build theories from them. The file on the detective's desk stays quieter than that, but it is not untouched by the noise. A careful investigator has to separate suspicion from proof. That is not a slogan, it is a daily discipline. You may hear something that sounds strange, but strange is not the same as admissible. You may find a gap, but a gap is not the same as an act. You may dislike an answer, but dislike does not give the answer weight. The Kyron Horman case never produced public charges against Terry Horman or against anyone else. That fact belongs in the room whenever we discuss why detectives could not crack it. A file can contain suspicion, interviews, searches, subpoenas, theories, and thousands of tips, and still not contain the kind of proof that can be carried into court. You can almost hear the difference in the paper itself between notes that raise questions and evidence that can bear a verdict. As you sit with this portion of the file, the human difficulty becomes clear. Detectives had to keep looking without pretending they knew more than they did. Kyron's family had to live in the open air of uncertainty. Witnesses had to be asked again and again about a morning they never expected to preserve. The community had to watch a child's photograph remain on posters long after the season changed. But the clock was not the only thing detectives had to study, because the case also became a study in how many voices can gather around one missing child. You turn now toward the tips, the calls, and the flood of public memory, where help can be generous and still make the work more complicated. In the days and weeks after Kyron disappeared, tips came from many places. Some were sincere recollections, some were possible sightings, some were names, vehicles, routes, rumors, impressions, or sudden memories stirred by seeing his face on the news. You can imagine the phones ringing in a task room, one line after another, with operators keeping their voices steady while the stack of notes grew higher. Each tip had to be handled as if it might matter. That is one of the burdens of a missing child investigation. You cannot dismiss too quickly, because the small forgotten detail may be the one that opens the file. You also cannot believe too quickly, because every false path costs time, energy, and attention. So detectives sort, verify, compare, and return to the beginning. The Kyron Horman case generated an enormous investigative record. Over time, authorities spoke of thousands of tips and many interviews. You can picture boxes filling slowly, not in one dramatic afternoon, but over months and years. A label is written on a folder. A binder is opened. A transcript is printed. A voicemail is logged. Another lead is assigned to someone who has already spent a long day inside the same unanswered question. The sensory life of that work is plain and repetitive. There is the heat of a laptop against a wrist, the faint stale smell of a windowless office, the taste of cold coffee, and the soft rip of tape sealing another evidence envelope. Detectives do not crack cases by living inside constant revelation. More often, they live inside repetition and they learn to respect it. A tip might say someone saw a child near a road. Another might mention a truck. Another might point to a person whose name had already appeared somewhere else. You follow each one, and most of them end quietly. A time does not match. A camera shows a different child. A witness realizes the date was wrong. A vehicle belongs to someone with a solid reason to be there. That kind of quiet ending is part of the work. It can feel disappointing from outside, but inside a case, ruling things out matters. You narrow the field by learning where the answer is not. In the Kyron Horman case, The difficulty was that ruling things out did not leave behind one clear remaining path. The possibilities shrank in some places and stayed open in others. There is a patience required to accept that. You sit with a detective late in the evening, perhaps, as the office settles and the building's air system clicks on. The desk is covered with organized uncertainty. Names are spelled carefully. Dates are checked. Maps are folded and unfolded. Somewhere, a printer starts and stops. The case remains there, unsolved, because careful work has not yet become final proof. Public cases create another challenge, which is the life of rumor. You can see how it happens. People care. They want to help. They want the missing child found, and they want the story to arrange itself into something understandable. But rumor often moves faster than evidence, and it can harden around people before the facts are ready. For detectives, rumor is both information and weather. It may carry a useful detail, but it can also cloud everything it touches. A person repeats something heard from a neighbor. The neighbor heard it from someone near the school. By the time it reaches an investigator, it has become smoother, more confident, and less traceable. You learn to ask, gently but firmly, how do you know? In the Kyron Horman case, the outside conversation became intense and sometimes personal. There were family disputes, public statements, legal filings, and years of speculation. You do not need to raise your voice to understand how hard that would be on everyone involved. A missing child case is already painful. When the world gathers around it, the pain becomes public, and the investigation must keep moving through that public noise. You return to the file because the file is steadier than the noise. It holds what was said, when it was said, who heard it, and whether it could be checked. It may hold contradictions, but it also holds the shape of the work. A detective can sit with a contradiction. What matters is whether the contradiction leads somewhere provable. And so the tips filled rooms, and the rooms filled boxes, and the boxes kept their quiet place in the history of the Kyron Horman case. Some leads may have seemed promising for a day. Some may have taken months to close. Some may still sit in the background, not forgotten, but waiting for one more fact to make them meaningful. That waiting is part of why the case has lasted. When the next box comes down from the shelf, we find the family timeline again, and we have to handle it with care. Family is often where detectives begin, not because answers are always there, but because proximity gives investigators the most immediate facts to test. In the Kyron Horman case, proximity was both necessary and difficult. Kyron lived with his father, Kyron Horman, and his stepmother, Terry Horman, at the time he disappeared. His mother, Desiree Young, lived elsewhere, and the family structure was already something detectives had to understand. You can imagine the interviews unfolding slowly, with tissue boxes on tables, water bottles half opened, and people trying to answer questions while absorbing something no family should have to absorb. The room would feel too small for the grief inside it. Investigators had to ask about routines, bedtimes, school mornings, medical appointments, household tensions, custody arrangements, who drove which vehicle, who knew the school schedule, who had access to Kyron, and who might have known where he would be that morning. These questions can sound cold on paper, but they are asked because ordinary routines are the framework around a disappearance. You, as the quiet reader tonight, can feel how delicate that work must be. A detective asking a grieving parent for details is not simply collecting facts. They are asking someone to return, again and again, to the hours before life changed. The smell of a child's room, the sound of a backpack zipper, the sight of shoes near a door, all of it can become evidence and memory at the same time. Over time, public focus settled heavily on Terry Horman. There were reports that investigators examined her statements closely, and later public claims and legal conflicts added to that attention. But attention is not the same as resolution. No charges have been filed in Kyron's disappearance. When you keep that distinction in mind, the case becomes quieter and also clearer. Detectives may examine someone intensely for years and still not reach the legal threshold required. That threshold exists for a reason. It protects the integrity of the work, even when the public wants certainty. You can almost feel the frustration in that space between suspicion and proof. It is a narrow room with no windows, and many cold cases spend years inside it. There were also reported allegations involving Terry and a separate claim related to Kyron, which drew public attention and deepened the family fracture. We do not need to linger on the sharpness of that period. For our purposes, it matters, because it shows how the investigation widened beyond the school morning and into relationships, motives, credibility, and competing accounts. Each new thread had to be checked against the original question. Where is Kyron? A case can become complicated when too many narratives grow around it. One story says, the answer is close to home. Another says, the school environment created opportunity for someone else. Another says, a stranger could have moved through the morning unnoticed. Another says, the truth lies in an overlooked timeline detail. Detectives cannot simply choose the story that feels most complete. They have to prove it. So you turn another page, and you let the family names rest on the paper without rushing them towards certainty. Kane wanted answers. Desiree wanted answers. Tony Young, Kyron's stepfather, spoke publicly at times as well. Terry denied involvement. Around them all, investigators kept working through records, statements, searches, and possibilities. The human circle was small, but the investigative circle was vast. The difficulty here is not only emotional, it is evidentiary. Family cases can sometimes be solved through inconsistencies, physical traces, communications, financial records, confessions, witnesses, or digital evidence. In the Kyron Horman case, none of those publicly known paths has led to charges. That tells you something important about the limits of what detectives could establish, even after extraordinary effort. You can picture a prosecutor reviewing a file in a quiet office, not looking for a theory, but for proof that can survive challenge. The lamp makes a small pool of light. The paper smells faintly of dust and ink. A legal pad waits nearby. Every statement must be tested for reliability. Every timeline point must be supported. Every inference must be connected to evidence strong enough for a courtroom. A courtroom is not built for maybe. It can hear possibilities, but it cannot convict on them. That is not a failure of feeling. It is a rule of proof. In the Kyron Horman case, detectives may have carried many beliefs privately, and the public may have carried even more, but belief is not the same thing as a completed case. Years passed, and the family kept speaking. Searches continued at times. Investigators followed leads as they came. The photograph of Kyron beside his science fair project kept returning to newspapers, television screens, websites, and missing posters. You can imagine the ink fading on some old flyers, the tape curling at the corners, the face still clear enough to stop someone in a grocery store entrance. But there was another part of the investigation that lived less in public emotion and more in physical space. In the wooded edges, roads and properties searched over the years. We move there gently now because land can be searched many times and still ask investigators to come back. The landscape around the Kyron Horman case is not a passive background. It shaped the work from the first evening. Northwest Portland, the Skyline area, nearby rural roads, and the broader search zones gave investigators many places to consider. If you stand there in your mind, you can feel damp air in your lungs, gravel underfoot, and the hush that trees make when wind passes through them. Searchers had to think like investigators and like outdoors people at the same time. Where could a child go on foot? Where could a vehicle stop? Which areas were accessible in the time available? Which places had been searched by trained teams, and which needed another look because a tip had changed the map? Each question placed a new transparent layer over the same terrain. The early search was enormous, but even an enormous search has edges. Weather changes what can be found. Vegetation grows. Water moves. Private property requires permission or legal process. Roads that look close on a map may be slow to reach in real life. You can feel the difference between a clean line drawn in an office and a muddy slope under a searcher's boot. In cases like this, dogs can help, but they are not magic. Cameras can help, but they only see where they are pointed. Volunteers can help, but they must be organized and kept safe. A helicopter can see broad patterns, but not every hollow underbrush. You begin to understand that searching is not one action. It is thousands of small actions, each with limits. The Kyron Horman investigation included searches over the years in places connected to tips or investigative interest. Some were public enough to be reported. Others may have been quieter. You can imagine deputies arriving with a measured manner, not announcing certainty, just following a lead where it points. A gate opens. Gravel shifts under tires. Someone unfolds a map against the hood of a vehicle. The soundscape of a search is subdued. Radios murmur. Branches snap softly. A handler gives a quiet instruction. Rain taps on jacket shoulders. Far away, traffic passes on a road that feels both near and separate. You walk the line slowly, because speed is not the point. The point is to notice what the landscape has kept. Yet, the landscape did not give detectives the answer. That is one of the central reasons the case remained unsolved. Without Kyron being found, investigators lacked the physical information that often narrows a missing child case. They could not study a final location. They could not connect that location cleanly to a person, route, or object. They had to keep working from absence. Absence can be investigated, but it resists being solved. You can measure when someone was last seen. You can measure when they failed to appear. You can measure who was nearby, who had opportunity, and who gave statements that do or do not hold together. But if the person remains missing, the file is missing its hardest fact, and every theory has to cross that empty place. There is a quiet discipline in returning to places already searched. It means no one is pretending the first effort was perfect. It means the case is allowed to keep asking. Searchers may stand in the same rain, near the same tree line, with newer equipment or a different tip, and begin again. That kind of repetition is not glamorous, but it is often where cold casework lives. For Kyron, each renewed search carried hope and restraint. Families may hope for an answer. Investigators may hope for a lead to resolve. The public may hope a long silence is finally ending. But a careful search team does not promise what the ground has not yet offered. They go in quietly, do the work, and report what can honestly be said. You can imagine the disappointment after another search ends without a public breakthrough. Boots are cleaned, maps are folded, evidence bags remain unused, or are used for items that later prove unrelated. The evening returns. The case file goes back to the shelf. Not closed, but not transformed. That is a hard kind of patience. In the Kyron Horman case, that patience stretched across years. Children who were in elementary school then grew older. Detectives changed assignments. Technology changed. The public conversation rose and fell, yet the basic question remained fixed in the same place. Where did Kyron go after that morning at Skyline Elementary, and why has no one been able to prove it? Years later, the file still had to make room for new tools, because cold cases sometimes wait for technology to catch up with questions. We turn now to the slow work of records, devices, and evidence that can be examined again, even when the original day is far behind us. In 2010, investigators already had access to many modern tools. They could review phone records, electronic communications, security footage, vehicle information, financial transactions, and digital traces. But the world was not as saturated with cameras as it would become later. Not every hallway had a recording. Not every road had a clear image. Not every phone produced the kind of location trail people now imagine. That matters in the Kyron Horman case. You might wish, looking back, for a camera outside every door, a time-stamped image from every intersection, a complete map of every phone. But detectives work with the world as it existed, not the world that would have made the case easier. The morning of the 4th of June was not designed to preserve itself. You can picture an investigator seated before an old monitor, reviewing grainy images frame by frame. The room is dim because screens are easier to read that way. A paper cup sits untouched. Someone, notes the time displayed in the corner of an image, then checks whether that clock was accurate. Even a camera, when one exists, has to be interpreted with care. Phone records can show calls, texts, and sometimes location-related information, but they are not always precise enough to answer a case alone. A tower can cover a wide area. A device can be left in one place, while a person goes another. A lack of activity can mean many things. You learn, as you read, that technology often narrows questions instead of ending them. Digital evidence also ages. Devices are replaced. Accounts are closed. Storage systems change. Some records are kept for limited periods. Investigators have to ask quickly, preserve carefully, and hope the useful material exists before it disappears. In a case discovered hours after the key window, even the request for data begins after time has already moved. The Kyron Horman investigation likely involved many records that have never been made public, and that is normal. You and I do not get to see the whole file. We see only the edges released through officials, reporting, court filings, and family statements. That should make us humble. A quiet narrator should never pretend that the public record is the entire investigation. Still, the public result tells us something. If digital records had placed a person and Kyron together in a provable way, or shown a decisive route, the case might look very different today. If a camera had captured a clear departure, the investigation might have narrowed quickly. If a device had contradicted a central timeline beyond explanation, prosecutors might have had a stronger path. None of that has publicly resolved the case. You can hear the patient frustration in those missing tools. Not anger, just the soft closing of one folder after another. A receipt confirms an errand, but not everything around it. A phone record places a device somewhere general, but not a child. A witness recalls a vehicle, but not enough detail. The case keeps asking for the one connection that has not appeared. Forensic evidence may also exist in forms the public has not seen. Items from vehicles, clothing, homes, or school areas could have been tested or preserved. But forensics can only speak when there is something meaningful to compare. A trace is useful when it belongs somewhere it should not be. In a family and school setting, many innocent transfers and contacts are already expected. You can imagine a lab report arriving in a plain envelope, its language careful and narrow. It may exclude, it may fail to include, it may say that no conclusion can be reached. People outside investigations often want forensics to speak in full sentences, but lab work often speaks in fragments. Detectives then have to place those fragments beside all the other fragments. The reason detectives could never crack the Kyron Horman case may not be one dramatic obstacle. It may be many ordinary limits stacked together. A delayed discovery, a busy school, no clear exit captured publicly, a wide search area, witness memories shaped by time, digital tools that could not reconstruct everything, evidence that raised questions, but not charges. As you sit with that list, do not let it become sharp or mechanical. Each limit belongs to real people. A teacher who did not know that an absence would become history. A parent waiting for a bus. A searcher walking wet ground. A detective writing the same name in a notebook years apart. A family hearing that there is still no answer, but the file did not remain only in the hands of one moment or one set of tools, because cold case work has its own seasons. As years passed, the Kyron Horman case became less like an emergency and more like a long vigil of review, rechecking, and waiting for the detail that might still come. Cold case work begins when urgency has faded from public view, but not from the people responsible for the file. You can imagine the difference in the room. In the first days, phones ring constantly, search teams deploy, and everyone moves with immediate purpose. Years later, the case may sit in a quieter office, where the same urgency has become something slower, steadier, and harder to see. A cold case detective may open a binder and smell dust before reading the first page. They may see older handwriting, older forms, older assumptions, and technologies that have since changed. They may have to learn the case from the beginning, almost as you are doing tonight. The first task is not to solve it. The first task is to understand what has already been done. In the Kyron Horman case, That means understanding the science fair, the family timelines, the searches, the tips, the public statements, the legal conflicts, and the long silence afterward. It means knowing which leads were exhausted and which were only paused. It means recognizing the difference between an old rumor and a documented statement. The work is slow because it has to be. You can picture a detective placing colored tabs along a stack of reports. Blue for school witnesses, yellow for search areas, green for phone records, pink for family interviews. The colors are not dramatic. They are a way to make thinking visible. At the edge of the desk, a mug cools beside a photograph everyone in the room knows by heart. Cold Case Review often asks different questions from the original investigation, not because the original work was careless, but because time changes what can be seen. A statement that once seemed minor may matter more after another lead appears. A location once searched may need another look because property changed hands. A person who stayed silent may decide, years later, to speak. Time can soften people. It can also harden them. Someone who was afraid in 2010 may feel differently years later. Someone who protected another person may no longer have the same loyalty. Someone who thought a detail was too small may finally understand that small details can matter. Detectives know this, so they keep the line open. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office has continued to identify Kyron's disappearance as an open case. That status is quiet but important. Open means the file is not simply history. Open means new information can still be received, compared, and acted upon. You can imagine a tip coming in years later and being placed against old maps, old statements, and old timelines. While the investigator listens for the faint click of alignment, most tips will not produce that sound. That is part of the patience. A person may report something they dreamed, something they misunderstood, or something already checked. Investigators still have to respond with steadiness, because the one useful call may arrive disguised as another ordinary message. The file teaches humility in that way. There is also a human cost to keeping a case open. Families have to live with repeated waves of hope. A new search is announced, and the heart rises. A new statement is made, and the heart waits. Then, nothing public changes, and the heart has to return to the same long room of not knowing. You can sit with that without forcing it into a neat lesson. Kyron's mother, Desiree, has continued to speak publicly over the years, keeping his name present. His father has also lived under the weight of the unanswered case. Whatever the family divisions, the central absence remains the same. A child went to school, and the answer did not come home with the bus. That is the simple line beneath every complicated one. As a listener, as the quiet detective tonight, you may feel the urge to solve the case by choosing one theory and letting the rest fall away. That urge is understandable. The mind likes closure. It likes a final page. But patient detective work asks for a different kind of respect. It asks you to hold possibilities without pretending they are proof. The Kyron Horman case resists closure because its public evidence does not form a complete bridge. One end of the bridge is the morning at Skyline Elementary. The other is the enduring fact that Kyron remains missing. Between them are boards that do not quite reach. A witness here, a timeline there, a search area, a suspicion, a disputed statement, enough to keep working, not enough to finish. And so we return, gently to the school again, because every path in this case eventually leads back to that morning hallway. The light through the windows would have been ordinary. The displays would have been bright, with markers and careful child effort. Adults would have leaned down to read titles, and children would have shifted from foot to foot, waiting for praise or permission to leave. You can almost smell construction paper, glue, and damp jackets near the classroom hooks. You can hear the low classroom buzz that never fully disappears, even when teachers ask for quiet. Somewhere, a copier may have warmed. Somewhere, a door may have opened to the outside air. None of those details solve the case, but they place you inside the difficulty of it. A school is built on trust. Children move through it because adults believe the routines will hold. Attendance will be taken. Doors will be watched enough. Familiar adults will be recognized. A child who is present in the morning will be present when expected later. The Kyron Horman case disturbed that trust, and detectives had to examine the disturbance without knowing exactly where it began. In such a setting, a stranger theory is difficult but not impossible. A known person theory is plausible but not proven. An accidental wandering theory had to be considered against searches and terrain. Each path has problems. Each path asks for evidence it has not publicly received. You can see why investigators could not simply settle on the most emotionally satisfying answer. There may have been people in the building that morning whose names were checked and cleared. There may have been visitors whose presence was explained. There may have been vehicles that seemed interesting until records placed them elsewhere. Much of that work is invisible to the public, because clearing a lead rarely becomes a headline. Yet every cleared lead is a piece of the investigation's quiet architecture. You turn the file page and see not only what remains, but what has been removed. That matters. A cold case is shaped by absence, but also by exclusion. Detectives can say, maybe only to themselves, that one rumor does not hold, one sighting was mistaken, one vehicle was unrelated, one person's timeline checked out. The public may never know all those small closures. Still, the central closure did not arrive. That is what makes the case endure. If Kyron had been found, even without charges, the investigation might have gained direction. If someone had confessed, the search might have narrowed to corroboration. If a witness had come forward with a verified account of his leaving the school, the morning might have become clear. But the file has not publicly received that kind of gift. The detectives could never crack the Kyron Horman case, in part because the case seems to have held back its simplest facts. Where he left from. Who, if anyone, was with him. Whether he moved on foot or by vehicle. Whether the answer began inside the school's routines or outside them. Each question is plain. Each one has resisted a public answer. When you sit with old cases long enough, you learn that mystery is often not elaborate. Sometimes it is the lack of one ordinary observation. A person did not look toward a door at the right second. A camera did not cover the right angle. A child's absence was not recognized until the afternoon. The missing fact is small in shape, but enormous in consequence. That is why the case feels both close and far away. Close because the last known setting is familiar to almost anyone who has walked a school hallway. Far away because more than a decade has passed, and the morning has receded into memory. You can hold both feelings at once. The case is near enough to picture, and distant enough to remain beyond reach. But there is one more layer to consider before the file grows quieter again, and it is the way public attention can help a case while also making the truth harder to hear. The Kyron Horman case became known far beyond the school, and that attention brought resources, awareness, and pressure. It also brought noise. Media attention can preserve a missing person's name. That is valuable. Without attention, tips may not come, searches may not be supported, and the public may forget too quickly. Kyron's photograph stayed visible because people cared enough to keep sharing it. You can imagine a poster on a community board, its paper smooth at first, then curled by weather and time. At the same time, attention can create a second case in public imagination. This second case runs parallel to the official one. It has its own theories, suspects, timelines, and certainties. It moves quickly. It rewards confidence. It sometimes forgets that real investigations must move more slowly, because real consequences wait at the end of every accusation. Detectives working the Kyron Horman case had to live beside that second case. They had to read tips shaped by broadcasts, statements shaped by public pressure, and rumors shaped by repetition. You can imagine an investigator taking a call from someone sincere, only to realize the caller is repeating something already widely circulated online. The voice on the phone may be earnest. The information may still lead nowhere. This does not make public help unimportant. It makes it complicated. A missing child case needs the public's eyes, but it also needs the public's restraint. Someone may remember a truck, a person, a conversation, or a road because of a news report. Someone else may begin to think they remember because the same image has been shown for years. The difference can be delicate. The court of public opinion also moves differently from the court of law. Public opinion can live on impressions. Law requires evidence. Public opinion can say, "This feels wrong." Law must ask, what can be proved, by whom, and under what challenge? In the space between those systems, the Kyron Horman case remained painfully unresolved. You can feel why families sometimes speak publicly with sharper certainty than investigators do. Families are not evidence machines. They are people living with absence. Their language may carry grief, anger, hope, exhaustion, and love all at once. Detectives may understand that deeply, and still have to keep their official words careful. Official caution can sound unsatisfying. It can sound like withholding. Sometimes it is withholding, because investigators protect details only the true source of information would know. Sometimes it is caution, because the evidence does not allow more. You, reading quietly tonight, can let that caution be what it is. Not indifference, not necessarily ignorance. A boundary around what can honestly be said. In the Kyron Horman case, that boundary has lasted for years. Authorities have encouraged tips, followed leads, and kept the matter open while not announcing charges or a definitive account. This creates a strange public rhythm. The case is alive, but quiet. Present, but not progressing in ways people can see. Remembered, but not resolved. A detective can work inside that rhythm for a long time. They may inherit the file from someone who retired. They may reopen an interview because a name appeared again. They may compare old statements with new technology. They may drive the same roads on a gray morning, not because they expect the road to speak, but because sometimes being in the place helps the mind notice what paper cannot. You can imagine that drive. The windshield carries a thin film of rain. Wipers move with a soft, patient sound. Trees lean over the road. Driveways appear and pass. The school comes into view, ordinary and changed by memory. A detective parks, sits for a moment, and lets the geography settle into the body. This, too, is investigation. The hardest part may be that every theory still has to return to evidence. If someone removed Kyron from the school, how did they do it without a clear public witness? If he left on his own, why did searchers not find the path? If an adult close to him was involved, why has the case not crossed into charges? If someone unknown was responsible, why has no later trace identified them? The questions are simple, but they do not answer each other. And perhaps that is the true shape of why detectives could never crack it. Not because they lacked care, not because they lacked scale, not because the case was forgotten, but because care, scale, and memory did not produce the missing connection. The investigation could gather many threads, yet none has publicly tied the school morning to a provable final account. So you sit with the file a little longer, under the small circle of lamplight, and let the paper settle. There is no need to rush ahead. The Kyron Horman case asks for patience, because it has always resisted force. It asks you to notice the ordinary things: the school hallway, the bus stop, the damp road, the poster board with the red-eyed tree frog, and to understand how an ordinary morning can become difficult to reconstruct once the moment has passed. The next page is quieter, but it is not empty. It holds the years after the first searches, when a case becomes part of a community's memory. People move away, children grow up, staff changes at the school, news crews stop coming as often. Yet somewhere in an office, the file remains, and somewhere in a family, the absence remains daily. You can picture an evidence room where boxes sit in ordered rows. The air is cool, the shelves are metal, labels face outward. A file like Kyron's does not sleep exactly, but it rests between moments of activity. When a new call comes in, when a lead is reassessed, when an anniversary brings public attention, the box comes down again, and the old pages meet new hands. Those hands matter. Cold case detectives are often translators between past and present. They read old interviews with present knowledge. They ask whether a technology unavailable then might help now. They look for assumptions that can be tested. They also guard against the temptation to see patterns just because the mind wants them. In a case this emotional, that guardrail is important. The work may include re-interviewing people who have told their stories before. You can imagine how that feels for a witness. A call comes after years. A familiar case name returns. The witness tries again to remember the hallway, the weather, the order of events, the sound of children moving around displays. Their memory may be weaker, or it may be clearer in one small place. Both possibilities have to be handled gently. A new interview can reveal a forgotten phrase or confirm that nothing more is there. Both outcomes matter. The detective thanks the person, closes the notebook, and returns to the desk. The room is still. Outside, the day has gone dark without ceremony. The case has moved, perhaps only by an inch, but cold cases sometimes move that way for years. The Kyron Horman case also shows how difficult it is to investigate a disappearance when the missing person is a child whose ordinary world was small. His life revolved around home, school, family, and familiar routines. That narrow world should have made the case easier. Instead, because the disappearance happened at the edge of a school event, the narrow world opened into a wide public space. You may think of the science fair again because it remains such a tender detail. Children make projects to be seen. They write facts carefully. They stand beside their boards while adults admire them. Kyron's red-eyed tree frog project became, unintentionally, the last widely known image of him. That is a heavy thing for a school project to carry. There is a photograph, and there is what the photograph cannot show. It cannot show what happened after. It cannot show every person in the hall. It cannot show whether anyone noticed something small and dismissed it as normal. It cannot show the future weight placed upon it. You look at it, and you understand why detectives value photographs, and also why photographs can be so incomplete. A photograph freezes one fraction of a second. An investigation needs the before and after. In the Kyron Horman case, the before was knowable in pieces. The after became the problem. The image says he was there. The rest of the morning does not speak as clearly. That is why the file keeps returning to witness memory, movement, and timing. As the years pass, a cold case can become vulnerable to overfamiliarity. People think they know it because they know the famous photograph, the school name, the suspected person discussed in public, and the phrase, "missing since the 4th of June." But knowing the outline is not the same as knowing the case. You, in the quiet tonight, are doing the slower thing. You are letting the outline remain unfinished. That unfinishedness is honest. It honors the difference between attention and answer. It allows Kyron to remain a child, not only a symbol. A boy with a science project. A boy expected on a bus. A boy whose name remains spoken because people have not accepted silence as the final word. That is a gentler way to hold the case. The investigation's inability to crack the case does not erase the work done. Searchers gave their time. Detectives spent years with the file. Family members kept asking. Community members called in tips. Federal and local resources were used. The absence of a solution can make all that labor feel invisible, but it is still part of the record. You can think of it like a long table covered with careful work. Not one piece has completed the picture, but each piece was placed there by someone trying. A map, a witness note, a search log, a phone record, a photograph, a school attendance detail, a family interview. A tip that turned out not to be the answer, but still had to be checked. This is patient detective work at its most difficult, because patience does not guarantee reward. Sometimes it only keeps the door open. It says, "We will not pretend to know. We will not close the file for convenience. We will continue to make room for the truth if it arrives late." In the Kyron Horman case, that late arrival is still what investigators and family hope for. And now, as we continue through the file, the next question is not who can be blamed in the absence of proof, but what kinds of proof would have been needed, and why each possible path remained incomplete for so long. You begin with the proof that would seem simplest from far away, a clear witness who saw Kyron leave. In many missing child investigations, one reliable observation can narrow the whole world. A person at a doorway, a vehicle at a curb, a child walking with a known adult. In the Kyron Horman case, that kind of public certainty never arrived, and the absence of it gave the morning too many exits. You can picture detectives returning to the school layout again and again. They would think about doors, hallways, classrooms, sightlines, and the way people moved during the science fair. A floor plan can look clean on paper, with rooms in neat blocks and corridors drawn as straight lines. But a school during an event is not a drawing. It is motion, sound, jackets brushing shoulders, voices overlapping, and adults pausing in doorways with coffee cups in their hands. A witness who saw something important would have needed more than a general memory. They would need a time that could be placed. They would need confidence that the child was Kyron, not only a boy of similar age and size. They would need to know whether he was alone, and if not, who was with him. You can feel how much weight such a witness would carry, and how carefully investigators would have tested every part of the account. If someone had come forward with a clean, corroborated sighting, the investigation could have tightened. Detectives might have known which door mattered most, which direction to search, which vehicle to identify, or which adult to question more directly. But without that, the school remained both the last known place and a kind of crossroads. You stand there in the file, listening to the old hallway noise, and every direction stays open. This does not mean no one saw anything. It means nothing publicly known became the decisive observation the case needed. That distinction is quiet, but important. Many people may have offered pieces. A child remembered seeing Kyron earlier. An adult remembered the fair. Someone may have remembered a hallway, a classroom, a general moment. Yet an investigation needs pieces that fit under pressure, and pressure changes everything. You can imagine an interview with a young student from that day. The room would be softened, perhaps with a parent nearby. The detective's voice gentle and careful. Children can notice details adults miss, but they also experience time differently. A few minutes can feel long. A routine moment can become tangled after adults ask about it repeatedly. The interviewer has to be patient enough not to lead, and precise enough not to lose the thread. Adult witnesses bring their own limits. They may want to help so badly that uncertain memories begin to feel useful. They may remember the morning through the later shock of Kyron's disappearance. They may recall where they stood, but not what they faced. You, reading beside the small lamp, can respect their effort without asking memory to do more than memory can do. The next kind of proof would have been physical, something that connected Kyron to a route or a person after the school morning. A found item, a trace inside a vehicle, a piece of clothing, a backpack in a place it should not be. Physical evidence can speak steadily when human memory falters. In the Kyron Horman case, no publicly known physical evidence has carried the case into charges. Physical evidence is not magic either. It has to be found, preserved, tested, and explained. If an item belongs to a child who lives with a family member, its presence in a family vehicle or home may not mean what it would mean in a stranger's car. If a trace is found in a school, it may be expected, because the child was truly there. Context gives evidence its meaning, and in Kyron's ordinary world, context was complicated. You can picture a technician opening an evidence envelope with gloved hands. The paper makes a soft crackle. A label is checked against a log. A swab is removed. The room smells faintly of plastic, ink, and cleaning solution. The process is careful because any later question in court may reach backward to that exact movement. If physical evidence had shown Kyron in an unexpected place after leaving the school, the file might have changed. If it had placed a specific person with him in a setting that could not be innocently explained, the file might have narrowed. If it had contradicted a public timeline in a measurable way, investigators might have had a stronger path. But the public record offers no such completed bridge. There may be evidence sealed away from public view. In a case this significant, investigators often keep details private. You and I should remember that. We are not holding the entire file, only the parts that have reached public understanding. Still, if hidden evidence was strong enough to support charges, the legal history would likely look different by now. The quiet fact remains that the case has not crossed that threshold. Another kind of proof would have been a confession, or a statement from someone with direct knowledge. Cold cases sometimes wait for one person to speak. A friend grows older. A relationship ends. A burden becomes too heavy. A witness finally understands the importance of something heard years earlier. In the Kyron Horman case, no public confession has resolved the disappearance. A confession to matter must also be tested. Detectives cannot accept every claim, because public cases attract false confessors, mistaken storytellers, and people seeking attention. The person speaking must know details not widely available. Their account must fit the timeline, the evidence, and the geography. You can imagine an investigator listening quietly, not reacting, letting the person talk while checking each sentence against the old file. The room in that kind of interview is often plain: a table, 2 chairs, a recorder with a small red light, maybe a box of tissues, maybe a bottle of water. Outside the room, another detective may sit with documents ready. Each detail is checked not because the listener is cold, but because truth has to survive contact with the record. Without a reliable confession or insider statement, detectives had to keep working from inference. Inference can guide an investigation, but it cannot always finish one. It can tell you where to search, whom to interview, what records to request, and which contradictions matter. But when the final step requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt, inference may stop just short of the courtroom door. This is one of the quiet lessons of the Kyron Horman case. A person outside the file may say there is enough. A detective may privately feel that one theory is stronger than the rest. A family member may be certain in the language of grief and lived experience. But the law asks for evidence that can be shown, challenged, and still hold. That is a different kind of certainty. You turn that thought over slowly, because it helps explain why the investigation could be enormous and still unresolved. Scale is not the same as solvability. Thousands of tips do not equal one verified witness. Many searches do not equal a found location. Years of suspicion do not equal proof. The file can grow thick without becoming complete. The next path is motive, and motive is often misunderstood. Motive can help explain why someone might act, but motive alone rarely proves that someone did. In the Kyron Horman case, public speculation often turned toward family tensions, but speculation cannot substitute for a clear account of what happened at Skyline Elementary. You can feel the difference between why and how. Both are needed, and neither can stand alone. Investigators may examine relationships because relationships matter. They may ask whether there were conflicts, pressures, resentments, fears, or changes in the household. They may study communications, schedules, and behavior before and after the disappearance. That is normal, necessary work. Yet even if a possible motive is identified, detectives still need the path from motive to action, and then from action to evidence. A motive without means and opportunity is unfinished. Means and opportunity without proof of action are also unfinished. You can see how the Kyron Horman case remained caught among these unfinished parts. There was intense public attention on people close to him. There were questions about timelines. There were years of searches and interviews, but there was no public charge and no public account accepted by the legal system as complete. This is not a satisfying place to rest, but it is an honest one. The detective tonight, the one you are becoming in this quiet room, cannot smooth the edges just to make the story easier. You keep the rough edge visible. The file did not become a solved case because the parts did not lock together firmly enough. But proof is not only gathered at the beginning, and sometimes old cases wait for records to be seen in a new way. So we turn now toward the later years, when the Kyron Horman investigation became a matter of reviewing what had already been collected, and asking whether the same facts might speak differently with time. The later years of a case can feel quieter from the outside. There may be fewer press conferences, fewer search photographs, fewer updates that reach the evening news. But inside the investigation, quiet does not mean stillness. A detective may spend weeks reading without saying anything public. A prosecutor may review a section and send questions back. A search may be planned because one old detail has shifted. You can imagine the file in a cold case office, its binders no longer crisp, its pages carrying the faint smell of age and toner. The first reports are older now. The ink on some labels may have dulled. A detective reading them years later brings new eyes, but also the burden of knowing how many others have already tried. That can make the work both hopeful and heavy. Cold case review often begins with organization. Not glamour, just order. You make a master timeline. You list every person interviewed. You separate first-hand knowledge from hearsay. You compare public statements to recorded statements. You mark each search area and each lead disposition. The work can feel like straightening a room where every object matters. In the Kyron Horman case, a master timeline would need to hold the science fair morning, the reported last sighting, the school absence, the bus stop discovery, the emergency call, the first searches, the family interviews, and the later investigative efforts. It would also need to hold the things we do not know publicly. That is difficult. A timeline with hidden portions is not empty, but it is hard for outsiders to read. You may picture an investigator drawing a horizontal line across a whiteboard, morning on the left, afternoon on the right. Beneath it, smaller lines for different people, vehicles, phone activity, and witness accounts. Dry erase markers squeak. Someone steps back. Another person notices a gap that everyone has seen before but wants to test again. This is how old facts are asked new questions. The questions may be simple. Was this time verified by a receipt, or only remembered later? Did this person's phone activity match their stated movement? Was this sighting independent or influenced by news coverage? Did anyone else place the same vehicle in the same area? Was a search area cleared before or after a particular lead came in? Each small answer either strengthens or weakens a thread. Sometimes a cold case review finds a mistake. Sometimes it finds a missed lead. Sometimes it finds that the original investigators did nearly everything that could have been done. That last outcome can be emotionally hard because it offers no new villain and no easy criticism. It simply says the case was difficult for real reasons. The Kyron Horman case may contain many such reasons. You can feel the patience in reviewing an old interview. The transcript lies flat under your hand. One sentence seems ordinary. Then you notice a timing phrase. Maybe the person said before lunch, but another record says after the fair. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it means the person was using a loose phrase. You write a note in the margin anyway, because cold cases are built from not ignoring small things. Then the note itself must be tested. You do not get to decide it matters simply because you noticed it. You compare it to the audio, if audio exists. You check whether the transcript was accurate. You see whether the person clarified later. You ask whether the discrepancy changes anything practical. Many promising margins grow quiet after that process. That quiet is not failure. It is filtration. The file becomes clearer when weak leads are marked weak, but clarity is not the same as answer. In the Kyron Horman case, the later reviews have not publicly produced the decisive shift that families and investigators have waited for. The work continues, but the path remains incomplete. Another tool of later review is recontacting people. Years can change what a person is willing or able to say. A witness who was a child in 2010 may now be an adult with a more developed sense of what they saw. An adult who was guarded then may feel less guarded now. A person who dismissed a detail may finally call because an anniversary brought the memory back. You can imagine such a call in the evening. The caller's voice may be hesitant. They may begin by saying they are not sure it matters. A good investigator listens carefully anyway. The detail might be small, the smell of a vehicle interior, a person seen near a doorway, an odd comment made after the disappearance, or a route taken that morning. Most details will not solve the case, but one might shift the map. The difficulty is that memory after many years is fragile. It can preserve a vivid image while losing its date. It can combine 2 days. It can borrow details from photographs, news clips, or conversations. Detectives know this, so they ask for anchors. What else happened that day? Who were you with? Did you write it down? Did you tell anyone at the time? The questions are gentle but exact. In a case as public as Kyron Horman's, later memories require special care. The witness may have seen the photograph many times. They may know the family names. They may have heard theories. Their memory may be sincere and still contaminated by the years. That word sounds clinical, but it simply means touched by other information. The detective must separate what was known then from what was learned later. This is one reason old cases can become harder, even as technology improves. People change. Records vanish. Buildings are remodeled. Roads are widened. Vehicles are sold. Phones are replaced. A school hallway may look different. A tree line may be cut back. You return to the physical world and find that time has been working there too. Yet old cases can also become easier in unexpected ways. Relationships loosen. Private loyalties fade. A person who once feared consequences may no longer fear them. A new forensic method may test an old item differently. A database may contain a connection that did not exist before. Cold case work survives because time takes away and gives back at the same time. For Kyron, that possibility remains part of the case's quiet endurance. The file is not closed. Tips can still be given. Evidence, if preserved, can still be reviewed. Someone who knows something can still speak. You can hold that hope gently, without turning it into a promise. Hope is allowed to be quiet, but there is also the legal path to consider, because even when investigators believe they understand a case, prosecutors must decide whether it can be charged. We turn there slowly, into the room where evidence becomes argument, and argument must be strong enough to stand beneath bright lights. A prosecutor reading the Kyron Horman file would not be asking only what seems likely. They would ask what can be proven. They would ask how each witness would sound under questioning, how each timeline point is supported, and whether the defense could offer innocent explanations for the same facts. The room may be comfortable, with carpet underfoot and a printer nearby, but the questions are hard. A criminal case involving a missing child without a found person is possible, but it is difficult. It requires a strong chain of circumstances, or direct evidence, or statements that make the conclusion unavoidable. The absence of a recovered child does not prevent prosecution by itself, but it removes many forms of evidence that would normally help establish what happened, when it happened, and who was responsible. You can see the problem in the Kyron Horman case. If the prosecution cannot prove what happened after the school morning, then even a suspicious timeline may not be enough. If there is no clear scene, then the alleged act becomes harder to define. If there is no physical evidence tying a person to Kyron after the last public sighting, the case must lean heavily on circumstances. Circumstances can be powerful, but only when they form a tight circle. Here, the circle has not publicly closed. That is the phrase you keep returning to, not because it is dramatic, but because it feels accurate. The circle includes the school, the family, the search areas, the timelines, and the public suspicion. But somewhere, there is still an opening. Through that opening comes reasonable doubt, and in court, reasonable doubt matters. A grand jury or prosecutorial review may hear information the public does not. Legal processes can unfold quietly. Subpoenas can be issued. Testimony can be taken. Investigators can keep working with prosecutors for years. Still, the public measure is simple. No one has been charged in Kyron's disappearance. That tells you the legal threshold has not been met publicly. You can imagine a prosecutor making notes in the margin. Strong here, weak here, needs corroboration, witness uncertain, timeline unsupported, defense explanation possible. These are not the words families want to hear, but they are part of the law's careful machinery. A case that is emotionally certain to some must still become legally sound. The defense side also exists, even before anyone is charged. Any person accused in public would have the right to challenge assumptions. question witnesses, and demand proof. A prosecutor knows this while reviewing a file. They have to think not only of what investigators believe, but of what can survive being pulled apart. That is why cases sometimes remain uncharged, despite years of suspicion. This legal restraint can feel like silence from outside. People ask why nothing has happened. They ask why, after so many years, no one has been held responsible. The answer may be unsatisfying because it is procedural and evidentiary. The law does not act simply because time has passed, or because grief has deepened, or because suspicion has settled on a name. It acts when proof reaches the required level. You and I can sit with that without turning away from the human cost. Legal standards protect everyone, but they can leave families in a hard place when evidence falls short. The file remains open. The questions remain active. The person believed by some to know more remains uncharged. The family continues waiting, and waiting becomes its own kind of labor. In the Kyron Horman case, that labor has lasted across many anniversaries. Each year, the date returns. The 4th of June becomes not only a calendar square, but a room the family must enter again. The weather may be different. The news may be quieter, but the question is the same. Where is Kyron, and who can finally tell the truth? Anniversaries matter in investigations because they stir memory. Someone sees a news story and remembers a road. Someone hears Kyron's name and recalls an old conversation. Someone who moved away thinks again about the morning at Skyline. Detectives know this, so anniversaries can bring renewed appeals. The voice may be calm, but the purpose is practical. Please look again. Please call if you know something. You can imagine a person hearing that appeal while washing dishes, or driving home, or sitting in a quiet living room at night. A detail may rise and then fade. They may tell themselves it is too small, too late, too uncertain. Cold case investigators would say the opposite. Let the small thing be checked. Let the uncertainty be tested. Do not decide alone that it cannot matter. But even public appeals have limits. They depend on someone hearing, remembering, and choosing to act. If the person with the needed information never hears the appeal, or never recognizes what they know, or never decides to speak, the case remains where it is. That is a fragile dependence, and cold cases often live with it. So the investigation keeps two postures at once. It looks backward into old records, and outward toward anyone who might still speak. The backward work is controlled, quiet, and methodical. The outward work is open, hopeful, and uncertain. Together they form the long patience of the Kyron Horman case. There is another thing to notice as we sit beside these pages. The case has never been only a puzzle. It is easy, especially from a distance, to treat unsolved cases as arrangements of clues. But every clue here belongs to a child, a family, a school, and a community. The point of solving it is not to win against mystery. The point is to return truth to the people who have lived without it. That is why the tone matters. You do not need to sharpen the story to feel its weight. The weight is already there in the bus stop, the science fair photograph, the searchers in the woods, and the detective rereading a report years later. It is there in the ordinary objects: a backpack, a school display, a pair of glasses, a missing person flyer softened by weather. The Kyron Horman case asks us to pay attention without turning attention into spectacle. You can be curious and gentle at the same time. You can examine timelines without forgetting tenderness. You can wonder why the case resisted solution without accusing where the evidence has not been made public. That balance is part of the patient work. And the balance matters because a case like this gathers strong feelings. People want the answer to be known. They want someone to say, "Here is what happened, here is why, here is where he is." The wish for that sentence is deeply human, but the file has not yet offered it. So we remain with the slower sentence instead, the one that says investigators kept working, and the answer did not come. The next part of the file brings us back to schools, not just Skyline Elementary as a place, but the way institutions respond when something unimaginable passes through an ordinary routine. We turn there now, because understanding the school day helps explain the fragile timing that detectives had to reconstruct. A school morning has many small systems: attendance, classroom arrivals, office notes, parent sign-ins, special event traffic, teacher expectations, bus schedules. Each system works best when the day is normal. On the morning Kyron disappeared, the day did not announce itself as abnormal at first. That is part of what made the investigation so difficult. You can picture a teacher looking at a classroom roster, perhaps expecting a child who had been at the science fair. Maybe the absence was noted. Maybe the explanation seemed likely. Schools often manage children moving between spaces, especially during unusual events. A child may be with a parent, in the office, at an appointment, or delayed by the fair. Assumptions can enter quietly. Those assumptions are not villains. They are how busy people keep a school day moving. But in the Kyron Horman case, any assumption around attendance became important later. If the absence had triggered immediate alarm, the search window would have been different. If the morning movement had been tracked more tightly, the timeline might have been narrower. Instead, the discovery came after the bus did not bring him home. This is one of the hardest facts to sit with, because it is so ordinary. No single bell rang through the morning saying a child was missing. The building continued. Lessons continued. Adults did their work. Children ate lunch, moved through hallways, and waited for dismissal. The absence was present, but not fully recognized. You can feel the ache of that when you imagine the afternoon. The school day ends, chairs scrape, papers go into folders, buses line up, and children move toward home. Somewhere inside the routine, Kyron's place is empty. The routine only recognizes the emptiness when it reaches the bus stop and cannot complete itself. That delay became a central wound in the investigation. Afterwards, schools and communities often review procedures. They ask how attendance is confirmed, how visitors are managed, how quickly unexplained absences are communicated, and how special events affect supervision. Those reviews matter. They cannot change the past, but they can honor it by making the future more careful. In that sense, Kyron's case became part of a broader lesson about ordinary safeguards. For detectives, however, policy review does not solve the disappearance. It may explain how a gap occurred, but not who used it, if anyone did, or what happened inside it. That is another quiet distinction. Institutional weakness can create opportunity, yet opportunity is not identity. You still need the person, the movement, the proof. The school's physical environment also matters. Hallways can have blind corners. Doors can open into parking areas. Visitors during an event may not be as tightly controlled as on a standard day. A child may seem safe because many adults are nearby, while no single adult is specifically watching. You can picture how that kind of shared responsibility can become, in one terrible moment, no responsibility at all. Again, this is not blame spoken carelessly. It is a way of understanding the problem detectives faced. The more people present, the more witnesses there may be, but also the more normal movement looks. A stranger may stand out in an empty hallway. During a science fair, an unfamiliar adult may be less noticeable. A familiar adult may be barely noticed at all. The Kyron Horman case sits at that uncomfortable intersection. A school is familiar, but the event made it open. A child was present, but not continuously tracked. Adults saw pieces, but no one publicly saw enough. The morning was ordinary, but later became evidence. You can hold the contradictions gently, because they are the structure of the mystery. When investigators later asked about the school, they were asking people to recreate a moving room. Who stood near the display? Who walked toward the classroom? Who left the building? Which doors were used? What vehicles were in the lot? What time did each person depart? The questions are simple, but the answers depend on moments no one knew to preserve. You might imagine the school after investigators had finished an early walkthrough. The hallway is quiet now. The posters still hang. The floor smells faintly of wax and damp shoes. A classroom clock ticks, indifferent and precise. The building has become an object of study, but it remains also a school, full of children's work and ordinary furniture. That contrast must have been difficult for everyone there. The public sometimes asks why cameras did not solve the case. That question belongs to the era we live in now, where cameras seem nearly everywhere. But in 2010, especially at a school on a quiet rural edge, coverage may have been limited or absent in key places. Even where cameras existed nearby, they may not have covered the right angle, the right time, or the right road. Technology can only witness what it faces. You can think of this as another missing witness. A camera would not forget, but it also would not turn its head. If the relevant movement happened outside its view, then the footage might confirm nothing more than what already was known. Investigators could gather images from businesses, roads, or homes where available. But each recording would have its own narrow field. The world was not fully recorded. That unrecorded quality is part of what makes older cases feel so different from newer ones. A person could move through ordinary spaces with less digital trace. A vehicle could pass along a road without being captured repeatedly. A phone might show some activity, but not a precise map. The Kyron Horman investigation took place on the edge between older investigative dependence on memory and the newer expectation of constant data. Because of that, the case required old-fashioned work: interviews, searches, timelines, door-to-door questions, records requests. Careful comparison. You can hear the rhythm of it. Knock, wait, ask, write, thank, move to the next house. The work is humble, and it can be exhausting, especially when the answer remains just beyond reach. It is worth staying with that humility. Detectives in long cases learn that certainty cannot be forced. The file may suggest, but it may not prove. The land may be searched, but it may not yield. A witness may try, but may not remember. A family may plead, but the missing detail may remain with someone who has chosen silence, or with time itself. So when we ask why detectives could never crack the Kyron Horman case, we are not asking why they did not care enough. We are asking why the case resisted the normal tools of resolution. We are asking why the timeline did not close, why the school did not produce a decisive witness, why the searches did not find Kyron, why the evidence did not reach court, and why time has not yet brought the missing voice forward. That question does not have one clean answer. It has layers. A busy school morning, a delayed alarm, a wooded geography, limited public physical evidence, complex family dynamics, heavy media attention, witness memory under pressure, legal standards that require more than suspicion. Each layer is ordinary by itself. Together, they formed a case that remained open. You turn the page again, and perhaps this next section contains a map of the area, creased at the fold from years of use. The paper is slightly glossy. Roads curve through green space. The school is marked, maybe with a small circle, maybe with a star. Around it, investigators would have imagined movement in every direction. The map is useful, but it is also a reminder that real ground is never as simple as paper. On the real ground, a person driving away may become one of many vehicles. A person walking may disappear behind brush or a turn in the road. A search team may cover a slope and still need to return after vegetation changes. A child may be looked for in one direction, while the answer lies in another. The terrain does not solve the case for you. It only gives you places to ask. And asking places takes time. Search warrants may be needed. Property owners may need to be contacted. Teams must be assembled. Weather must be considered. Dogs and equipment must be available. A lead that sounds urgent still has to become an organized search before boots touch ground. The public may see only the day of activity, not the planning that came before. In the Kyron Horman case, searches over time showed that investigators did not simply leave the question alone. They returned when leads pointed them somewhere. They reviewed areas. They followed information. Yet, no search has publicly found the answer. This is the repeated ache of the file, the way effort and absence keep meeting without resolution. You can imagine the end of such a search day. The sky is low and pale. A deputy's notebook is damp at the edges. Searchers speak in tired voices. Someone removes gloves and rubs cold hands together. The vehicles leave one by one, tires pressing dark tracks into soft ground. The location has been checked, but the case remains. There is dignity in that kind of work, even when it does not deliver the hoped-for result. The searchers still gave the day. The investigators still followed the lead. The family still endured the waiting. You can let that dignity remain, because not every meaningful act changes the outcome. Some acts matter, because they refuse to abandon the question. The file then returns to paper, as files always do. Reports are written, results are logged, items, if any, are recorded, leads are updated. A detective may write no evidence located, or nothing of investigative value found, and those words may feel small compared with the effort behind them, but they are necessary. They keep the case honest. Honesty is one of the quiet themes here. It is honest to say the case is open, honest to say no one has been charged, honest to say public suspicion has existed for years, honest to say suspicion is not proof, honest to say the family deserves answers, honest to say detectives cannot invent them. In a sleep story about a real case, gentleness and honesty have to walk together. As the evening deepens around our imagined desk, you may feel how the case becomes less like a riddle and more like a long act of waiting. Not passive waiting, investigative waiting. The kind that keeps records ready, keeps phone lines open, keeps evidence preserved, and keeps a name from fading. The waiting has texture, paper, rain, metal shelves, old photographs, soft voices, and there is still more to sit with, because every long investigation also becomes a story about what the public is allowed to know, what investigators must keep back, and how silence can be both frustrating and necessary. The Kyron Horman case has lived for years inside that careful silence, and we turn toward it now with the same slow patience. Silence in an investigation can look empty from the outside, but inside the file, it often has a purpose. You learn that quickly when you sit with the Kyron Horman case, because the public record is wide in emotion and narrow in certain details. Investigators have never laid every piece on the table. They rarely do. A withheld detail can protect a witness, test a future statement, or keep a false confession from sounding believable. You can imagine the frustration that creates for a family. A detective may know why they cannot say more. A parent may still hear only another closed door. The room can be quiet and full of care, and still the silence hurts. Papers may be neatly stacked. Voices may stay gentle, yet the question beneath everything remains urgent in the human heart, even when the investigation must move slowly. In the Kyron Horman case, official caution has been a constant feature. Authorities have asked for information while keeping much of their evidence private. That means we, as careful listeners, have to speak with restraint. We can describe the difficulty of the case. We can notice the public gaps. We can understand why suspicion formed. But we cannot pretend to possess the hidden file. That restraint is part of patient detective work. You keep one hand on what is known and one hand open for what may still be unknown. If a theory depends on details never confirmed, you leave it lighter on the table. If a claim comes from grief, rumor, or old reporting, you treat it with care. The truth may be near one of those claims, but nearness is not the same as proof. Investigative silence also protects the future. If someone comes forward years later and gives a detail only investigators know, that detail matters. If every detail has been released, detectives lose that measuring tool. You can picture a small fact sealed inside the file, maybe about a timing point, an object, a route, or a statement. It sits there quietly, not because it is unimportant, but because it may be needed later. The public often wants everything disclosed, especially after many years. That wish is understandable. The case feels old. The pain has lasted. People ask what harm could come from opening the whole file. But cold cases can still change, and once information is released, it cannot be made private again. A detective thinking about tomorrow may keep a detail back today. You can almost hear the old file cabinet closing. The metal drawer slides in with a muted sound. A key turns. The hallway outside the office is dim. That small act of closing the drawer is not an ending. It is preservation. It says the case may need this again. It says the future still has a claim on the evidence. In the Kyron Horman case, this careful silence has left room for speculation to grow. Where facts are absent, stories gather. Some stories are built from public statements. Some are built from legal filings. Some are built from neighborhood talk or online interpretation. You can understand the human impulse. The mind dislikes a blank space and begins sketching in lines. But a sketch is not the same as the original picture. You notice that as you read, one person repeats that investigators must know more than they say. Another insists the answer is obvious. Another argues that if the answer were obvious, charges would have come. Each claim may contain a piece of reason, but none replaces evidence. The file remains patient while people speak around it. For detectives, public certainty can become another obstacle. If everyone believes one path, other paths may be underreported by witnesses who assume their detail does not fit. If a person thinks the case has already been solved in public opinion, they may decide not to call. If a rumor makes someone afraid of being misunderstood, they may stay quiet. The weather around the case can affect what reaches the file. This is why official appeals often return to simple language. If you know something, come forward. If you saw something, call. If you think it may be too small, let investigators decide. You can hear the patience in that message. It does not ask the public to solve the case alone. It asks the public to bring the pieces they actually have, without forcing them into a story first. The Kyron Horman case needed that kind of careful participation. It needed first-hand memory, verified detail, and information that could be checked. It needed someone to say where a vehicle was and how they knew. It needed someone to remember a conversation and connect it to a date. It needed the ordinary specificity that turns a lead from fog into a path. Specificity has a texture, a receipt with a time, a photograph with a background, a voicemail saved by accident, a calendar note, a neighbor who wrote something down before the news made it famous. You can feel how different those things are from general suspicion. They have edges. Detectives can hold them up to the light. The problem is that many useful details are not recognized as useful when they happen. On the 4th of June, 2010, a person may have driven past Skyline Elementary and noticed nothing unusual. They may have seen a vehicle and forgotten it by lunch. They may have walked through the science fair and remembered only their own child's project. By the time Kyron's name was everywhere, the morning had already begun dissolving into ordinary memory. This is one of the saddest practical truths in the file. The case may have needed a witness before the witness knew they were a witness. You can sit with that gently. It is not blame. It is the way life moves. We do not record every doorway, every parked vehicle, every face in a hallway, because most days do not ask that of us. Then one day does. The investigation had to fight that ordinary forgetting. Detectives asked people to look back. They asked for photographs from the science fair, because backgrounds can hold clues no one noticed at the time. They asked about vehicles, people, times and routes. You can imagine families searching through digital cameras, memory cards, and old phones, squinting at images taken for reasons that had nothing to do with evidence. A photograph meant to capture a child's project might also capture a hallway edge, a doorway, or a passing adult. A background face might lead nowhere. A partial vehicle might be too blurred to identify. Still, investigators look. They enlarge, compare, and ask. The work is meticulous, and often it produces nothing visible to the public. But it has to be done. In a modern case, the request might include cloud albums and phone backups. In 2010, it may have included compact cameras, older phones, printed photos, and memory cards tucked in drawers. You can feel the small plastic card between your fingers, light as a breath, holding a morning that everyone wished had been more carefully preserved. Technology, again, was present, but not complete. Digital photographs also need context. When was the image taken? Was the camera clock accurate? Was the image edited or copied? Who took it? Where were they standing? What direction were they facing? A photo can become evidence only after it is anchored. Without the anchor, it may be an image of the right place at the wrong moment, or the right moment from the wrong angle. The Kyron Horman case likely involved that kind of quiet photographic work, because the science fair was visible and documented in at least some form. Yet no publicly released image has shown the decisive movement. The photograph that endures is the one of Kyron beside his project. It confirms presence. It does not reveal departure. You can think of that as the file's central visual paradox. The clearest picture is also incomplete. It gives the world a face to remember, but not a path to follow. It shows a child before the question opened. It cannot show what came next. Detectives had to keep looking beyond the frame, into the unphotographed minutes around it. Those minutes became a kind of country of their own. You return there again and again. The bell schedule, the science fair movement, the classroom expectation, the reported last sighting, the attendance confusion, the afternoon bus. Each piece is known in some form. The unknown lies between them, like a narrow strip of road disappearing into trees. And because the unknown strip is narrow, people sometimes assume it should be easy to close. But narrow time can still contain many possibilities. A few minutes can allow a child to leave through a door. A few minutes can allow a vehicle to depart. A few minutes can allow a mistaken assumption to form. The size of a time window does not tell you how much evidence it left behind. You can imagine two detectives standing over the timeline late at night. One taps a pen near 8:45. Another looks toward the attendance mark. The room is quiet enough to hear the building settle. They are not trying to make the case dramatic. They are trying to make it exact. If exactness does not come, they begin again. The public may think of cold cases as waiting for a single brilliant insight. Sometimes that happens. More often, they wait for corroboration. A statement needs a record beside it. A suspicion needs a trace. A search area needs a reason stronger than feeling. In the Kyron Horman case, the story that would solve it has not gathered enough confirmed companions. That is one of the reasons investigators return to old witnesses. A single memory may not be enough, but two independent memories can strengthen each other. A memory plus a photograph can become more useful. A memory plus a receipt, or a phone record, or a vehicle registration can become a lead with legs. The file is always looking for companions. You can feel that search for companionship among facts. One fact alone sits quietly. Another arrives and sits beside it. Do they belong together? Do their times match? Do their locations make sense? Do they narrow the field? Or do they only appear related because we want them to be? Patient investigators ask those questions until the room grows still. There were also legal and civil echoes around the Kyron Horman case, and those echoes shaped public understanding. Family members made claims. Court filings emerged. Disputes became public. A civil case can reveal some assertions, but it is not the same as a criminal conviction. You hold that distinction carefully. Documents can show what someone alleged, not necessarily what investigators proved. Civil proceedings can also interact with investigations in complicated ways. A family may seek answers through a lawsuit when criminal charges have not come. Attorneys may ask questions investigators are not ready to have answered publicly. A court may pause or limit civil action to avoid interfering with an active criminal investigation. The legal world has many doors, and not all open at the same time. For a listener half asleep, the details of filings may drift like papers in a dim room, but the basic point is simple. Public legal conflict did not solve the disappearance. It reflected the pressure around it. It showed the need for answers. It may have surfaced claims and responses, but the central investigative question remained where it had been, waiting for proof. You can picture a courthouse hallway, polished floor under soft lights, people speaking in low voices near wooden benches. A file is carried from one room to another. The case name appears on a document. Outside, cameras may wait. Inside, the law moves at its own pace. Even there, with formal papers and official stamps, the missing child investigation is not automatically resolved. The Kyron Horman case therefore lived in several places at once. It lived in the sheriff's file. It lived in family grief. It lived in public discussion. It lived in court documents. It lived on posters and anniversary appeals. Each place had its own language, and those languages did not always match. A detective had to translate carefully, and sometimes ignore the noise to keep working. That kind of translation can be exhausting. You may read a media report, then compare it to an official statement, then compare both to a legal filing, then return to the original police timeline. Each version may emphasize different things. Some may omit context. Some may use sharper words. The careful reader has to keep asking, what is the source, and what does it actually establish? In our quiet room, we do the same. We do not need to discard public information, but we do need to weigh it. A family statement can reveal pain and belief. An official statement can reveal investigative posture. A court filing can reveal allegations and procedural facts. A news report can gather details from several sources. None alone is the whole case. This is why the Kyron Horman investigation remains difficult to retell responsibly. It is not only unsolved, it is surrounded by strong claims that cannot be treated as final answers. A gentle script must not sharpen uncertainty into accusation. It must let the unknown remain unknown, because that is where the real case still lives. But uncertainty does not mean emptiness. There are solid points. Kyron was at Skyline Elementary on the morning of the 4th of June 2010. He was expected at school and later at home. He did not arrive on the bus that afternoon. An extensive search and investigation followed. No one has been charged in his disappearance. These facts are simple, and they hold. Around those facts, the unresolved questions gather. Who last saw him with certainty? How did he leave the area? If he left the school grounds? Was the movement noticed but not understood? Did someone know the routine well enough to use it? Did a delayed alarm erase the trail? Did physical evidence fail to survive, or has it simply not been enough? The questions are many, but they all circle the same child. You can feel how the file narrows when you say his name, Kyron. Not just the case name, not just the public mystery, but a boy. A boy who liked learning, whose science fair project became part of memory, whose photograph is still used because people need to keep looking. The investigation's purpose begins and ends there. That purpose can get obscured when a case becomes famous. People argue about theories, they compare timelines, they debate behavior, they focus on adults, statements, and suspicion. Some of that is understandable, and some of it may even help keep attention alive, but the center should remain steady. A child is missing, and the work is meant to find him and establish the truth. You bring the file closer and notice how much of it is made from ordinary care. Searchers walking lines, detectives conducting interviews, family members preserving memory, community members calling in tips, office staff logging information, prosecutors reviewing thresholds. The case did not remain open by accident. It remained open because people continued tending it, even when tending did not produce closure. Tending is a quiet word, and it fits cold cases. You tend a file by keeping it organized. You tend a lead by checking it fully. You tend a memory by recording it accurately. You tend a family's hope by being honest, even when honesty is painful. In the Kyron Horman case, tending has lasted far longer than anyone wanted. There is a particular kind of fatigue that enters long investigations. It is not the sharp fatigue of one sleepless night. It is the slow fatigue of returning for years to the same unanswered page. Detectives may carry it in their posture. Families carry it in anniversaries. Communities carry it in the way a name remains familiar even to people who never met the child. You can imagine a detective retired now, still remembering the case when rain falls a certain way. The mind returns to the school, the road, the map, the photograph. Old cases do that. They do not always stay in the office. Sometimes they travel quietly with the people who worked them, showing up in small moments, asking again for the missing piece. That is another reason these cases deserve calm. The people inside them have lived with enough intensity. We do not need to add theatrical fear. The facts themselves are enough. A morning, a school, a missing child, a file that is not closed, a set of detectives who had to keep saying, "Not yet," even when everyone wanted now. As you read further, you begin to understand that a case can be thoroughly investigated and still remain unsolved. Those truths are not opposites. They can sit together on the same page. The Kyron Horman case seems to belong to that difficult category, at least from what is publicly known. Much was done, much remains unknown. A thorough investigation can still miss something because no investigation is omniscient. It can miss a witness who never came forward. It can miss evidence that was moved before anyone knew to look. It can miss a route because the first map was too broad. It can miss a detail because the detail only mattered after another fact appeared years later. Thoroughness reduces risk. It does not abolish it. You can feel the humility in that. Detectives are not characters with complete vision. They are workers in time, weather, memory, and law. They make calls, conduct searches, review evidence, and ask people to remember. They do not command the past to reveal itself. They wait, persist, and test what comes. In Kyron's case, time was both witness and thief. It preserved the photograph. It preserved public memory. It preserved the case name. But it also took away freshness, changed places, dimmed recollections, and lengthened the distance between the last known morning and any new lead. You can feel both sides of time in the paper under your hands. This is why the case can still feel active in a quiet way. It is old enough to be a cold case in public feeling, but not old enough to belong only to history. Many people connected to that morning are still alive. Records may still exist. Someone may still know something. The door is not closed. It is simply not opening easily. You may imagine a phone on a detective's desk, ordinary and black, waiting without drama. Most days, it does not ring with the answer. It may ring with administrative calls, routine messages, and tips that lead nowhere, but the possibility remains. A case can live for years inside the possibility of one call, one memory, one person deciding that silence has lasted long enough. That possibility is not a conclusion. It is part of the ongoing work. The Kyron Horman case continues to ask for information because information is the one thing an open case can still receive. The file cannot go back to the school morning and place a camera where none was. It cannot make every witness record every second, but it can still accept the missing detail if it comes. There is also the possibility of technology revisiting what already exists. Old devices, preserved evidence, archived records, and digital copies may be examined with newer methods when appropriate. Not every case has evidence suitable for modern testing. Not every test will produce a result, but cold case investigators keep those possibilities in mind because years can change the usefulness of what once seemed limited. You can picture a sealed box opened in a lab after a long time. The air inside smells faintly of cardboard and plastic. A technician reads the chain of custody notes, then pauses at the date. The object inside may be ordinary. It may have been tested before. It may or may not contain anything new. Still, the act of looking again carries a careful hope. In the Kyron Horman case, the public does not know whether any such future test will matter. We only know the investigation has lasted long enough for methods and assumptions to change. That is what cold cases do. They wait beside the edge of future capability. Some are solved when science catches up. Others remain unchanged because the needed evidence was never there. It is important not to promise science's rescue. Many cold case stories now end with genetic genealogy, advanced testing, or digital reconstruction, and those endings can make us expect every old mystery to yield eventually. But each case depends on what was preserved. If there is no suitable sample, no unknown profile, no recoverable data, the finest method has nothing to hold. Technology cannot create the missing fact from air. That may be part of why detectives could not crack Kyron's case. The decisive evidence may never have been collected because no one knew where to collect it, or it may have been collected but did not identify anyone, or it may exist in a form too ambiguous to use. Each possibility leads to the same public place, which is an open case without charges. You sit with that open place as the room grows darker. The lamp becomes warmer against the desk. Outside, perhaps rain begins again, soft against glass. The file does not hurry. The pages wait for your hand. There is no sudden turn here, only the steady recognition that some investigations are not stopped by one wall, but slowed by many small locked doors. One locked door is the school day. Another is memory. Another is terrain. Another is legal proof. Another is public noise. Another may be silence from someone who knows more than they have said. You do not rattle these doors loudly. You simply note them, one by one, because the file asks for patience rather than force. And still, the investigators had to make choices. No case can follow every lead with equal intensity forever. Resources are real. Time is real. People are real. A detective unit must decide which tips deserve immediate action, which should be logged, which have already been disproved, and which need more information before they can move. Those choices shape the investigation, even when made carefully. The Kyron Horman case was large enough to draw many agencies and enormous attention, especially in the early period. That size helped. It meant more searchers, more analysis, more interviews, more public awareness. But size can also produce complexity. More information means more sorting. More attention means more noise. More agencies mean more coordination. The machinery grows, and the question at the center remains small and precise. You can imagine a command meeting during the early investigation. People sit around a table with maps, assignments, and tired faces. Someone updates the search status. Someone summarizes interviews. Someone reports on tips. Someone asks what must happen before morning. The air smells of coffee, damp coats, and printer paper. Each person has a task. None has the answer yet. Coordination itself takes work. Search teams need direction. Investigators need to avoid duplicating interviews in confusing ways. Evidence must be logged consistently. Tips must be tracked so they do not vanish into piles. In a fast-growing case, the administrative structure becomes part of the investigation's strength. Without it, information can be lost. The fact that Kyron's case still did not resolve after such an effort shows the depth of the problem. It was not a matter of nobody looking. Many looked. It was not a matter of no one caring. Many cared. The difficulty lay in the absence of the decisive lead, the corroborated witness, the recoverable route, or the physical proof that would move the case from searching to charging. This is perhaps why the phrase "never cracked" can sound harsher than the work deserves. Detectives did not crack the Kyron Horman case, but they did not set it down as unimportant. They kept it open, and open is an active condition. Open means the file can still breathe when new information comes in. Open means the last page has not been written. As we continue, you may notice how often the case returns to ordinary systems, failing to become extraordinary at the right moment. Attendance did not become alarm. Soon enough. Witness memory did not become a clear path. Search terrain did not become a discovery. Public attention did not become proof. Legal pressure did not become charges. Each system did something, but none completed the answer. That pattern is not dramatic. It is quietly devastating. A case can remain unsolved not because one person made one obvious mistake, but because every available system fell just short of what the moment required. You can feel the softness of that failure, and perhaps its heaviness too. It has no clean edge to point at. It spreads across time. This is why blame can be tempting. Blame gives the mind a handle. It says, here is where the story rests. But patient detective work resists handles that are not supported by evidence. It may pursue a suspect intensely. It may test an alibi. It may confront a contradiction. Yet it must still return to the proof. Without proof, blame becomes another kind of fog. In the Kyron Horman case, fog has always been one of the file's quiet images. Not literal fog only. though the Pacific Northwest gives us enough damp gray mornings to imagine it. It is the fog of partial knowledge. The school visible but incomplete. The timeline marked but open. The family known but divided. The search extensive but unrevealing. The public certain in places where the law remains still. You can sit inside that fog without fear. This is not a thriller, it is a study in the limits of knowing. A child's disappearance asked the world for answers, and the world has answered with effort, hope, suspicion, and silence, but not yet with proof. That is the atmosphere of the file. Soft paper, rain at the window, a photograph that never changes. The next pages lead toward the people who kept the case alive after the first wave of attention, and we follow them gently, because remembrance itself became part of the investigation's long survival. Remembrance can sound passive, but in a missing child case it has work to do. You see that in the Kyron Horman case, where family members and investigators had to keep his name present after the first search tents came down and the first news cycle moved on. A name repeated with care can keep a door open. It can reach someone who was not ready to speak before. You can imagine an anniversary gathering on a gray Oregon day. People stand with jackets zipped, holding signs that have been handled many times. The paper edges may be soft from weather. A candle flame may struggle in the damp air. Voices stay low, not because the feeling is small, but because some kinds of grief do not need volume. Kyron's face remains at the center. For a family, remembrance is not a public relations task. It is survival. It is a way of insisting that the child is more than the mystery. You can hear that in the way families speak names in long cases, slowly and clearly, as if the name itself is an anchor. Kyron was not only a file, he was 7. He had a school project. He had a place at home. He had a future everyone expected to unfold. As years passed, age-progressed images became part of the public effort. Those images try to do something tender and difficult. They ask the viewer to imagine time continuing for a child who has not been found. The face is both familiar and altered, shaped by artists and specialists who study family features, growth, and possibility. You look at such an image and feel the ache of time made visible. Age progression can help keep attention alive, but it cannot solve a case by itself. It gives the public a way to recognize someone older, if that impossible possibility should appear. It also reminds everyone that time has not stopped just because the photograph at the science fair has remained the dominant image. In the Kyron Horman case, that contrast is especially strong. The boy beside the red-eyed tree frog stays 7 in public memory, while the calendar keeps moving. You can imagine a detective pinning an updated image near the original photograph. The two faces sit side by side under office light. One belongs to the morning everyone knows. The other belongs to the years that might have been. The paper is smooth, the colors carefully printed, and the silence between the images is large. Investigators do not need to say much in front of it. Public remembrance also produces tips. Someone sees an age-progressed image and thinks of a person they once saw. Someone notices the anniversary and remembers a conversation. Someone who moved away from Portland hears the name again and feels a small old uncertainty return. Most of those tips may not be the answer, but each must be given a place to land. That place to land is part of the investigation's infrastructure. Phone numbers, online submission systems, agency contacts, assigned detectives, and tip logs all keep remembrance connected to action. Without that structure, memory floats. With it, memory can become a lead. You can see how even a poster on a grocery store board participates in the larger system, if it moves one person to share something specific. In the Kyron Horman case, the family's public persistence helped keep the case from fading into a quiet local archive. Desiree Young spoke often over the years, asking for answers and pressing the case into public consciousness. Kyron Horman also lived with the case's long shadow. Their experiences and views have not always moved in the same public channel, but the absence at the center was shared by all who loved Kyron. You can sit with that without trying to smooth over the family divisions. A missing child case can strain and fracture relationships that were already complex. People grieve differently. They blame differently. They hope differently. They speak to the public differently. Detectives have to listen to all of it while keeping their work fixed on evidence. That is not easy. A detective may meet with one family member in the morning and another in the afternoon. Each may carry pain, certainty, anger, or exhaustion. The detective must be humane, but also precise. They must answer what they can, decline what they must, and avoid promising what the file cannot support. The room may smell of coffee and raincoats. The words may feel old and newly painful at the same time. Families in long cases often become their own archivists. They save articles, photographs, statements, flyers, and notes. They remember dates that others forget. They know which reporter called in which year, which search happened after which tip, and which official phrase changed slightly over time. You can picture a box in a closet, not unlike an investigative box, filled with the public life of the case. That family archive is emotional rather than official, but it matters. It keeps continuity when agencies change personnel. It keeps pressure when public attention fades. It holds the child's story in a domestic space, beside ordinary household items, where grief and routine coexist. A missing child's room, a file box, a photograph on a shelf, each becomes a form of witness. The community also carries memory differently. Some people remember where they were when they first heard Kyron was missing. Some remember joining early searches. Some remember driving past posters for years. Some remember fear in the school system afterward, the tightening of routines, the questions parents asked. A case like this enters local memory through many small doors. You can imagine a parent in Portland years later, hearing the name Kyron and feeling the old morning return. The damp air, the school drop-off line, the ordinary trust placed in a building full of children. That recognition is part of why the case remains powerful. It happened in a setting people understand. It unsettled a routine people depend on. For detectives, community memory is useful, but difficult. It keeps the case alive, but it also preserves rumors alongside facts. A neighbor may remember what was true and what was only repeated. A former student may remember the emotional atmosphere more clearly than the actual morning. Someone may recall a vehicle because it was discussed later, not because they saw it then. Every memory has to be handled with both respect and caution. That is why investigators ask for details rather than impressions. Where were you standing? What time was it? How do you know? Did you tell anyone then? Do you have a photograph, a message, a receipt, a calendar entry? These questions can feel small, but they are how memory becomes usable. Without them, remembrance remains important to the heart, but less helpful to the file. The Kyron Horman case needed both kinds. It needed heart memory to keep his name from fading and evidence memory to move the investigation. Those two kinds of memory often travel together, but they are not the same. One says, "We remember him." The other says, "Here is something specific that may help." A long case survives best when both are treated with care. As you read through the years, you can feel the rhythm of anniversaries. The 4th of June returns, and with it come interviews, statements, renewed appeals, and the quiet reopening of public attention. Then the day passes. Summer deepens. Other stories fill the news. The file remains. Families in long cases learn this rhythm in their bodies. The rise before an anniversary and the stillness after. An anniversary can be both comfort and wound. It says the child is remembered. It also says another year has gone by without an answer. You can imagine a family member looking at a calendar and not needing to count. The date knows itself. The morning knows itself. The body remembers before the mind begins to speak. For investigators, anniversaries are strategic. People may be more willing to speak when a case returns to public view. New stories can reach new audiences. Social media can carry images farther than older posters did. A person who was a child at the time may now understand the significance of what they saw or heard. The anniversary becomes a practical tool, even while it remains emotionally heavy. In the Kyron Horman case, each renewed appeal had to face the same challenge. The people most likely to hold valuable information may already have been contacted, or they may not recognize their information as valuable, or they may be unwilling to speak. An appeal is a gentle knocking on many doors at once. Most doors do not open. The hope is that one eventually will. You can picture the detective after an anniversary appeal, returning to a desk where new messages wait. The phone light blinks. Email folders fill. Some tips are vague, some repeat old claims. Some include sincere but mistaken sightings. A few may need immediate follow-up. The detective sorts them, not with excitement, but with steady attention. Every message has to pass through the same careful gate. There is a smell to that room in your imagination, paper and warm electronics, perhaps the faint mineral scent of rain drying on a coat. The chair fabric is worn. The keyboard letters shine slightly from use. Outside, the day is ordinary. Inside, a child's name is typed again, entered into a system that has held it for years. Some tips in missing child cases concern possible sightings far away. These can be emotionally powerful because they offer the hope that the missing person is alive somewhere. They can also be difficult because children grow, faces change, and strangers can resemble photographs. A sighting must be checked, but checking it often leads to a different person with their own ordinary life. You can imagine that process quietly. Investigators receive an image or location. They contact local authorities. They compare age, physical features, records, and circumstances. They may find that the person is not Kyron, and then the lead closes softly. For the public, it may never be known. For the family, if they are told, hope rises and falls again. Hope can be hard on families because it has no fixed weight. Some days it is light enough to carry. Other days it becomes heavy. In long missing cases, hope must make room for frustration, grief, anger, and fatigue. A gentle retelling should not choose one emotion for them. It should let the human mixture remain human. The Kyron Horman case also kept alive through organized search efforts and private persistence. Families sometimes push for searches when investigators cannot say much publicly. Communities sometimes gather volunteers. Agencies may follow specific leads with professional teams. Each effort has its own quiet logistics. From permission and safety to maps and weather, none begins simply because people care, though care is the reason underneath. You can see a search plan forming on a table, area maps spread out, highlighters mark access points. Someone checks land ownership. Someone checks weather. Someone brings water, gloves, radios, and printed assignments. The mood is subdued because everyone knows why they are there. No one wants drama. They want usefulness. Searches years after a disappearance can be especially difficult. Terrain changes, houses are built, land is cleared or overgrown. Seasonal conditions alter visibility. A place searched in summer may look different in winter. A drainage area may shift. Even with trained teams, the ground does not surrender easily. You feel that as a physical fact, mud on boots and cold air in the throat. When a search produces no answer, it still tells investigators something. It may reduce the likelihood of one lead. It may clear a property. It may show that a tip was mistaken. These outcomes do not comfort the public, but they matter. The file becomes slightly more ordered. One question may be moved from active to closed, while the larger question remains. This is another pattern in the Kyron Horman case. Smaller questions may have been answered privately while the main question has not. A person cleared here, a sighting disproved there, a search area checked, a rumor dismissed. The public sees the unsolved whole and may assume nothing moved, but inside the file, many smaller doors may have opened and closed. You can think of the investigation as a house with many rooms. The front door, the answer to what happened to Kyron, remains shut. But inside the house of inquiry, detectives may have entered many smaller rooms, examined them, and turned off the lights. The building is still there. The locked door is still there. Yet the work inside has been real. The phrase "could never crack the case" suggests a hard shell. In a way that fits. But the shell was not only one thing. It was made of time, place, silence, and proof. Detectives may have found lines in the shell. Places where it looked thin, but none opened fully. The case remained intact, not because it was untouched, but because it did not break where pressure was applied. There is patience in accepting that metaphor only lightly. We do not need to make the case seem clever or willful. It is not a puzzle designed to resist. It is a real disappearance in a real place, shaped by ordinary gaps that became extraordinary. That is why the calmest explanation may also be the most difficult. The evidence needed to solve it has not publicly come together. As the years moved on, younger people who knew Kyron became adults. Teachers changed schools or retired. Investigators changed roles. Technology changed around the file. The case aged, but the age did not make it less important. You can imagine someone who was a child at the science fair now looking back with an adult's mind, trying to remember the sound of that hallway. Childhood memories are strange rooms. Some details remain bright for no clear reason, while others vanish completely. A poster board color may remain, a teacher's voice may remain, the order of events may not. A child witness from the Kyron Horman case may remember the feeling of the day becoming serious after the adults became worried, but not the morning before worry had a name. That is why early interviews with children are so important, and also why they are so careful. Investigators want to capture memory before it is touched by repetition. They also must avoid shaping it. A question asked badly can create confusion. A question asked gently can preserve truth. The interviewer's voice, the room's calm, the order of questions, all of it matters. You can imagine a trained interviewer sitting with a child, perhaps asking open questions about the morning. Tell me what you remember. What happened next? Where were you standing? Who else was there? The child may swing their feet, look down, or reach for a cup of water. The room must make space for silence, because children often remember in pauses. Those early child interviews, if conducted, would now be precious parts of the file. They would preserve the morning closer to when it happened. Later, when those children are adults, detectives might compare any new memory to the old account. Did the memory stay the same? Did it grow more detailed in ways that suggest influence? Did a small early comment now matter more? The old recording becomes a time capsule. Adult witnesses also leave time capsules through their first statements. In a cold case review, the first statement often matters more than the 10th retelling. It was made before public theories hardened. It was closer to the day. It may contain awkward uncertainty that is actually valuable because it has not been polished. You learn to respect the roughness of early memory. The Kyron Horman case likely contains many such early accounts. They sit in reports, perhaps summarized, perhaps transcribed, perhaps recorded. Some may be clear, some may conflict, some may be frustratingly vague. The detective reading them years later has to listen not only to what was said, but to how certain the person seemed and what prompted the statement. Certainty itself can be misleading. A person may be highly confident and wrong. Another may be hesitant and accurate. Investigators know this, which is why they seek corroboration. You can feel the carefulness of that word, corroboration. It is not dramatic. It is a companion. It means the memory does not have to stand alone. In the Kyron Horman case, the missing corroboration appears again and again. A theory might explain one part, but not another. A suspicion might fit emotion, but not enough evidence. A memory might point somewhere, but not securely. A search might follow a lead, but find nothing. The case keeps asking each piece to find its companion, and the companions remain too few. That scarcity of corroboration affects every possible path. If the path leads toward someone known to Kyron, detectives need evidence that person had both opportunity and action. If the path leads towards someone unknown, they need evidence that such a person intersected with him and removed him from notice. If the path leads toward accidental wandering, they need a route and a reason the searchers missed him. Each path requires support. You may notice that no path is easy. A known person theory must explain how the school morning unfolded without decisive detection. A stranger theory must explain access, timing, and the lack of a clear witness. A wandering theory must explain the geography and the searches. The difficulty of each path may be one reason the case has resisted public resolution. Every route encounters a wall. A detective cannot choose the route with the lowest wall if it still cannot be climbed. They have to keep testing all viable possibilities, even when one seems more likely. That is slow work. It can look indecisive from outside. Inside the file, it is discipline. The evidence decides the path, or the path remains unchosen. This is also where tunnel vision becomes a quiet danger in any high-pressure case. Investigators must guard against focusing so heavily on one theory that they miss others. Public pressure can intensify that danger. The Kyron Horman case had strong public focus on certain people, and a careful investigation would need to test that focus while still remaining open to other possibilities. Patience includes resisting premature certainty. You can imagine a supervisor asking, "What if we are wrong?" It is a hard question, but a necessary one. What lead have we not followed? What assumption have we made? What fact would change our view? The room may fall quiet when those questions are asked. They are not signs of weakness. They are signs that the investigation is trying to stay honest. At the same time, staying open does not mean treating every theory equally forever. Evidence can make some theories weaker. Investigators can close leads. They can prioritize. The balance is delicate. Too narrow, and you risk missing the answer. Too broad, and you spend resources chasing shadows. The Kyron Horman case required that balance under public scrutiny, which makes the work harder. You can feel how exhausting it would be to hold that balance for years. The file pulls in one direction. Public pressure pulls in another. Family pain pulls with understandable force. Legal standards pull toward restraint. New tips pull attention away, then sometimes return it to the same old places. The detective has to keep walking, slowly, carrying all of it. There is a kind of courage in that slowness. Not the loud kind, but the kind that sits at a desk after everyone else has gone home and rereads a paragraph because something about it still feels unresolved. The lamp hums faintly. The paper is cool. Outside, traffic has thinned. Inside, the case waits, as it has waited for years. The Kyron Horman case is often described through its unresolved center, but around that center are many acts of persistence. The searches, the interviews, the public appeals, the family advocacy, the reviews, the preserved evidence, the continued open status. These acts did not solve the case, but they kept the possibility of solving it alive. You can honor those acts without pretending they were enough. That is an important kind of honesty. It says the work mattered, and the absence remains. It says people tried, and the answer did not come. It says patience is noble, but not always rewarded on the schedule the heart needs. This is the soft truth many cold cases teach. As we move farther into the long years, the case becomes less about immediate search and more about endurance. Endurance has a quieter sound. A folder sliding from a shelf, a phone call returned, a detective's notes reopened, a mother speaking a name again, a community member sharing an image without knowing whether it will reach the right person. These are small sounds, but they carry. You can imagine the evidence room once more, because it is a place where endurance becomes physical. Boxes sit in a controlled space. Each item is tied to a number, a date, a collector, a chain of custody. The air may be cool enough to raise the skin on your arms. Fluorescent light reflects on metal shelving. Nothing looks emotional, yet every label belongs to a human story. Evidence rooms are built to resist time. They cannot stop it, but they slow disorder. They keep items from being lost, mixed, or casually handled. In a cold case, this matters deeply. An item preserved with care may become testable later. A document kept in order may prevent confusion. A chain of custody may allow evidence to be used if the case finally reaches court. In the Kyron Horman case, preservation would be essential because the future remains part of the investigation. If a new lead appears, old evidence may need to be compared. If a person speaks, details may need to be checked against what was collected. If technology improves, preserved material may matter. the file's future depends on the care taken in its past. There is something almost meditative about that continuity. One person collects, another logs, another stores. Years later, someone else retrieves. The case passes through hands, and each pair of hands must respect the work before it. You, sitting with the file tonight, are part of that imagined chain of attention, turning pages without rushing them. But attention alone cannot fill the central gap. That is why the case remains so quietly difficult. It has received attention, it has received resources, it has received public awareness, it has received family advocacy. Still, Kyron has not been found, and no one has been charged. The gap remains because the missing facts remain missing. The next part of our slow walk through the file returns to the idea of opportunity, because opportunity is one of those words that can seem simple until you try to prove it in a real case. In the Kyron Horman investigation, opportunity had to be measured through school access, timelines, vehicles, relationships, and the short span of a morning that no one knew would become history. Opportunity, in the end, is only a doorway unless evidence shows who passed through it. You can sit with that doorway for a while. The school hallway quiet now. The science fair tables folded away. The damp Oregon morning long since lifted into memory. In the Kyron Horman case, detectives studied opportunity from every side they could reach, through timelines, searches, statements, records, and years of returned questions. Still, the doorway never became a proven path. Kyron Horman remains missing. His disappearance from Skyline Elementary School on the 4th of June 2010 is still unsolved and remains an open case to this day. No one has been charged in connection with his disappearance, and his whereabouts are still unknown. That is the plain status of the case, spoken gently, because a listener should never be left waiting for an ending that the real world has not given. So the file stays open, not loudly, but steadily. You can imagine it resting in the care of those who may still return to it, with old reports in their folders, maps softened at the folds, and Kyron's photograph still clear beneath the years. The room is quieter now. The lamp gives a small circle of light. Outside the window, rain may come and go, as it does in Portland, touching the glass and then slipping away. There is no final answer to place on the desk tonight. There is only the careful work that was done, the work that may still be done, and the name of a child held patiently against forgetting. The questions remain where they have always been, but they do not need to keep you awake now. For tonight, the file can rest open, the pages can settle, and the quiet can hold what is still unknown.